Hello and welcome back to another episode of Active Breath, the MVM Miller Voice Method podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kyle Cameron. My co-host is here. What's your name, friend?
I'm Scott Miller.
There he is. And we have with us today a fabulous guest. She is my boss. I mean, I guess you're both kind of my boss. She's the general manager of the company. She is an actor, a certified Miller Voice Method teacher. And she is a person with a tremendous amount of interest in activism and politics, which is why we're going to talk to her today. Ladies and gentlemen, and all other kinds of folks, Ali Evarts.
Oh my gosh, what a lovely introduction, Kyle. Thank you.
Yeah, you wrote it. You wrote it for me.
We're always fully transparent here. Maybe too much so.
I guess
Just
I
transparent
did.
enough. Yeah. Welcome. Thank you so much for...
so excited to be here with you all talking about this. I'm a little bit nervous because I feel like this has been years, like a decade in the making, to share, particularly with my family, about how much politics can learn from voice and from what I've learned from Scott and MVM in general. So thank you.
Exciting. So we have a little tradition in our MVM meetings that we're going to try out bringing onto the podcast, which is these little check-ins. We each get the same amount of time, so we'll shoot for like about a minute or so each, and just it's an opportunity to just speak what's on your mind, what's on your heart, and I don't know. We find it to be a really interesting way to sort of level out the playing field and meet people where they are. So does anyone want to jump in with a 1 minute check-in first? Anyone want to be the first guinea pig?
I can go first.
Do it, Scott. Go for it.
Yeah, and I think another reason we do it is many of our meetings are via Zoom, so we don't get the luxury of like seeing you in the hallway before the meeting or after the meeting and things like that. And you know, someone just magically pops into your living room and then vanishes, vaporizes a second later. So this is a way for us to get a sense of where you're coming from. So if you're like, you know, in a great mood or a grumpy mood or whatever mood, we know it has nothing to do with us. Where when you don't know that, people start to wonder and personalize, and it can be very, very unnecessarily distracting. So I'm going to officially say that wasn't part of my 1 minute. And now I will.
I like that.
Thank you. So where am I today? Let's see. This morning, you know, I just came back. Well, by the time this airs, it'll be about a month out. But I took a trip to Finland, where I've been teaching workshops for the better part of a decade now. Came back from one of those, and this morning woke up, and again, by the time this airs, I'll have finished this tour. We've put together, I'm on sabbatical now, so we MVM put together this a mid-Atlantic, going through two different university tour, spreading the word and sharing MVM and having conversations, and it's, you know, being well welcomed, mainly because it's perhaps pro bono at this point. So, but it's, you know, it's our ongoing mission to get this information out to every human being on the planet that desires to learn about it. So that's it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ali, do you want to go next?
Sure. Where am I? Well, I'm here in North Carolina, and we're finally feeling spring. Yesterday it was like 80 degrees outside, and so I'm feeling like the dusting off of like the winter rust. And we get a lot of pollen here once it gets to be real springtime. So like getting the opportunity to open the windows and let some fresh air in before we are caked in clouds of yellow dust everywhere. It's really nice. And also, I think just like so many things to talk about with politics. And I'm feeling a little bit like zoom, zoom, zoom.
Yeah.
Energy. Yeah.
Nice. I think I saw some of the videos of the pollen last year, and it was insane. Just wild. Where am I coming from? I had a lovely evening last night. So I finished a run of the Hills of California in the fall, which is a large play by Jez Butterworth, cast of 13, with a lot of double casting. And we really the director, Loretta Greco, really put together a company that gelled, which doesn't always happen, and especially not at that scale. And last night I went out with one of my castmates' birthdays is coming up. So five or six of us went out last night. First time we'd seen each other since the show closed 3 months ago. And, it was a co-pro. So we spent a lot of time together, like 4 or 5 months. It feels like a lot longer than that. But it was really, sometimes you forget that in your adult, middle age, you can make new friends and they can be like really good friends. And so it's nice to have that feeling. It's nice to get to indulge in that a little bit. So shout out to Karen. Happy birthday, Karen. And with that, let's get into it. Usually in these episodes, I tend to kind of be one of the sort of facilitator, interviewer kind of. I'm supposed to be kind of the grease. That's sort of my job. And today we're speaking to a person who put together an incredibly detailed, thoughtful outline for the episode. So I'm going to kind of throw it to you, Ali. I'm really curious to hear about all this work that you and Scott have done in this field. And I honestly, I know very little about it. So I'm really excited. Let's start with this, though. You are an actor yourself. You have had voice training of your own through your acting training. And then, of course, you are a certified Miller Voice Method teacher. So you've done a lot of work on the voice, learning about production and technique and all of that. What do you feel like that has offered you, either in this field of politics or just generally in your life?
Thanks, Kyle. There's so many different ways that I could go with this answer because voice training has been had a huge impact on my own performance, my professionalism, my sense of self. But I think the most relevant thing for me to talk about today is how much I've learned about leadership and what meaningful communication and leadership looks like, particularly in community organizing and in politics. I started learning about MVM in 2012. And although I was taking classes from an acting perspective, I immediately was paying attention to how politicians speak, because I've just always been fascinated by politics. I mean, there's something about growing up in North Carolina as a swing state, a state that in the US really feels like we get to choose the president in a way that a lot of other, when you're voting in some states, you don't necessarily have so much of a say because the state always votes one way or the other. Yeah. But since North Carolina is so purple, I through voice training first with JP at UNC and then learning more about the work that Scott has done with various candidates, it's really made me think about what meaningful activism looks like and how we can help people who are incredible leaders, but maybe aren't such good speakers. How we can put those people in positions of power.
Yeah, because those things are not, they don't necessarily line up.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what I notice in the conversations that I have, especially in like the leftist community, like leftist activism. So often the people who get elected or have gotten elected in the past, it feels like they got elected because they were likable, but not because they were actually going to be able to do the job well. So what does it mean for someone to be likable? And I think so much of that comes through their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this in the work in the sort of models section, right? We talk about point of view, and if I can feel your point of view, then I can sort of recognize you and place you somewhere in the world. And because I can understand who you are, that gives me a window on who I am, because I can kind of hold my point of view up to yours. And then that can lead to all of these questions about memorability and likability. And so how do we train that? How do we develop people's skills in their delivery to sort of access that, right?
Yeah, I was thinking, I've just a note on that. I was just thinking about that as I was thinking about this episode, and in the sense of scaffolding impact. And in that regard, the point you're speaking to, Kyle, right? I mean, worst case scenario is I hear you speak. I have no clue about your point of view. So therefore, I don't know who you are. And if I don't know who you are, I can't have a reaction to you. Right. And and then I don't know who I am in this scenario. And then I walk away incredibly either afraid or frustrated. And in the sense of the viral impact, like speaking about that experience in the future to others, that is the lowest impact level. The next level of impact is, I listen to your clear point of view. I disagree with your clear point of view. I know more of myself because I can feel my energy of disagreement, and I go. But that has a viral element too, because then when I go talk to someone else about it, I'm impassioned in the way I'm talking about you, right? So I become your kind of what's the word? Avatar, right? Because ultimately when I'm speaking about you, especially in an impassioned way, I'm speaking about myself, right? I'm always speaking about myself through the avatar of you. And that, even though there's a disagreement in policy or opinion about that person, there's still, you're talking about that person, right? So there's a viral aspect to it. And in politics, that's a big deal, that you're actually still talking about them, right? And then, finally, the highest level of impact, obviously, is you're clear with your point of view. I can see you. I have an opinion about your point of view. I can feel myself, and then I agree with it. And then I go speak to a friend, impassioned about that, and in agreement. And then we have that kind of tribal adhesion starting to actually happen, and the viral aspect. So.
And it's interesting as I'm sitting here listening to you all talk. In front of me are these like detailed notes that I have taken in my own little office about what I want to make sure that we cover. And I think I'm having to close my eyes so that I can actually pay attention to what you all are saying in this moment.
Yeah.
And in that sense, activism and political communication feels similar to performance because there's a goal. Like I come in
a message.
Yeah. Like as an actor, I come in sometimes with the goal of like, I want to make sure that people know I'm a good actor. And that is just as pernicious to my acting as coming in and saying like, I want to make sure that this person votes for the person that I want them to vote for. And I end up talking past them, and I'm not actually paying attention to what's going on in the moment. So
and we all feel that. Right, we all feel that.
Right,
that's like out of a blowhorn. We feel it in our nervous system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like Ali, you're saying, right? Just like your ears are hearing words coming at you, right? So why aren't you perceiving each and every one of them? And yet your mind can be on my notes. It's a similar thing, right? If your mind, if you have the agenda of persuasion, and we can feel it in your voice, in your body language, in everything about you, it's as if we didn't hear any of the words you're saying. And I think that's appropriate, because as a primal animal, like, you should be on high alert, right? Someone is after something, and they're not being really transparent in the language of what they're trying to do to you, you know?
I'm so interested about the social aspect of the audience in that equation, because I think that there's, in a lot of situations, there's a certain amount of like politeness that comes about. And so I think people sometimes make excuses for that feeling of, I'm not connecting with what you're saying because you're sort of blowhorning at me. But like, in a lot of circumstances, we don't want to like call that person out or speak up about we'd rather just like nod and move on. And so it's like, I find I think about it in the acting world as well, but certainly I think in this world too, when you point out that fact that the audience can feel that energetic disconnect, sometimes they're surprised to hear that, because they can relate to it, but they haven't necessarily named it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
so it's like, how do we build that ability to stay present and porous with your audience, but also how do we build the audience's ability to be like, yeah, that didn't do anything for me?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You know, when I mean, we'll get into this, but when I was working with the DCCC candidates, and the first part of the training that we created for them was, a group training. So I was working with 13 candidates, and these were candidates who were brand new candidates and trying to flip red districts. And
can you just say what DCCC is?
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And they're basically charged with finding and coaching new candidates for the upcoming election. And that, I had, fortunately, it's a long story, but fortunately I had gotten connected with them through a Democratic donor. And at the time, the chair of the committee was Ben Ray Lujan, who has since gone on to become a senator, I believe from New Mexico. And we had solicited a lot of people with the approach and the benefits of the approach. But he's the one who really kind of got it at a lunch meeting we had with him. He was like, "Someone give me a napkin. This is really interesting," and he just got it. And then I was able to eventually work with these select candidates who were trying specifically to flip districts. And the first group session was basically the theories, the understanding, and a few exercises to just kind of illustrate in their bodies how far they needed to work and how much work ahead of them were. But I would say about, 30 minutes into the session of the explaining a lot of the theories, I could sense in the room that I was losing them. And so it's speaking to what exactly you're talking about, right? And so I hadn't done a ton of political work before, and this was like a pretty major gig, and I was super excited. So I could feel every ounce and, every whatever in my body go, okay, you got a decision to make here. Very quickly, right? Going through my mind. You can either just plow on or you can, stop and address the situation in the room. And I did, and as I often do, if I find that's happening, I just stop. And I stopped, and I was like, okay, I don't think you all are impacting the incredible importance of what I'm talking about here. And they kind of looked a little stunned, and I said, no, this is not a judgment. I'm not like angry at you, but obviously something is going on that is blocking your ability to pay attention in a kind of, involved way. And then you could just feel the whole room and we're like, yeah, we're exhausted. It's just so tight.
Right, you're totally right. Yeah.
And this and that and all the stuff. So we just sat, just pulled up a chair and we talked for the next 15 minutes about where they were at and what was going on and, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got on with it. And, their ability to pay attention was completely different. But I think it's crucial. It's crucial. And to your point, Kyle, if you've been a child growing up in a household, you've learned how to be somewhat conflict averse or manipulative and trying to evade conflict and get what you need to some degree. Not everybody, but most people I encounter are not looking to get into conflict. So when it does arrive, or the potential of it arises, we've developed all these escape hatches. But what I would say is that, if I had chosen to continue that lecture, I would have actually gone more into conflict, right? So it's that, do I rip the Band-Aid off quickly now, or do I slowly peel it away? Because either way, it's going to hurt a little bit potentially, and it hurt in the sense it's going to ask your attention to be a little more alert. That's what I'll call pain. Attention, a little more alert, right? So. And in that instance, it helped just deal with the situation and reorient us. But that's the power of transparency, which is, one of the, maybe the most specific underlying principle of the work, which is, that sense of, if I can just be transparent, because it already is happening. So it's not an issue of, is it happening or not? It is happening.
Right.
So now can we all, not even agree, can we all look in the same direction of the event?
Yeah.
And then we'll find out what to do about it at that point, hopefully. So
dealing with present information.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you involved in this process, Ali?
No. This was before Scott and I started working together. I mean, I'd heard from JP that Scott was doing this kind of work. And I think that was, at the time I was living in DC, and that was part of what continued to interest me about MVM specifically, particularly because it's so different than the other presentation training that I was hearing from political operatives who I was talking to in DC. Even just the other day, I was getting ice cream with my in-laws, and my father-in-law turned to me, hi, Hank, looking forward for you to listen to this podcast. And he said to me, I saw a TikTok video, where I saw a video on social media that was about, if you lift the end of your sentence, you sound less powerful than if it lowers in pitch. Is that kind of what you do? And I immediately was like, no, no, that is not at all what we train. But it's a good example of what I heard a lot from folks in DC when I would talk about, I'm fascinated by voice training. And they would be like, oh, well, I was part of the group of people who taught Bill Clinton not to point, but to turn his finger because that looked better. So Scott, would you share a little bit of what this old training was like and how what you're training?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say not so old. I mean, I would say it's still prevalent. It is the majority of what's being trained, and what was and to this day is very challenging on how do you explain what we do in a short period of time to people who don't have a lot of time to understand what the hell you're talking about. So, I think, talk a lot about that, but I think what comes to mind when you're talking about that, Ali, is Authenticity. So this is the catch-22 about authenticity. You can't train authenticity. Like the minute you try to train authenticity, right, exactly. You are no longer authentic. It's like that person knocking on the door and really having the agenda to convince you of something, right? But trying, using the words that, it's really up to you. You have the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. But what you can train is, all right, exercises to get you in the neighborhood, your nervous system in the neighborhood, where it'll start to discover what is actually going through their body in a present moment, right? And what that looks like eventually, who knows, right? We're all unique. So for me to say, it's better if you point your finger or you have your hands like this, or most people when they, have this thing happen. And that's all to say, those things could all be true, right? But when I do it, I don't get the same result. So now it's not authentic, even though that's what I teach, right? And that's what I do. And it works for most people. I'm not sure why it's not working for you, right? So how do you set up a training and an apparatus where you're sourcing that data of what for that individual person is their brand of authenticity? And then once you've identified that, how do you get them in that neighborhood time after time under incredible amounts of duress, right? And so
huge pressure.
Yeah. So that's basically what we train, right? We train through duress, which is, again, anything that occupies your attention other than the task at hand. And the way we train that is through bringing in elements. And I'm not making anything new up or genius up. This is what they do in high-level sports training and have been doing it for a long time. So the memory remembers those elements of duress in a combination of the skill building itself, right? And then you have to, right, through a series of exercises, you start to have to understand what is that particular candidates or speakers or whoever it is, parents, wheelhouse, or where is their place of most comfort. So the objective isn't to try to convince anybody. The objective is to be as transparent as I possibly can, so people actually have the space to make a decision, whether they agree with you or don't agree with you. And hell, if most people don't agree with you, then probably you should not be leading them. And that's okay. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine, right? That's when the system really works. But if you don't care if most people disagree with you and you still want to lead them, now we're in trouble. Now we're moving into dysfunction, systemically speaking, right? So I say this over and over. I don't think the ills of the world are misdeeds or bad deeds. I think the ills of the world is the lack of transparency around those deeds. If we had the transparency to actually see them and understand them, all the deeds, then I think things probably would take care of themselves. But that's the challenge. So when I first started working in that realm, that's traditionally called as media training. So we would start to talk a little bit about what we do, and you do media training. He's had media training. They've had media training, and I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by what they've had? Oh, they taught us how to stand, or they taught us how to make eye contact, and they taught us how to do this, and it was
stay on message.
Yeah, stay on message. And again, I have to reiterate, not that that's not true or important, but it's not what we do. So, and the other challenge was you talk with whether it was candidates or at a certain point we were talking with elected officials, people already in office at all different levels in federal, mainly federal government, and in the room, that individual who was the elected official would be incredibly enthusiastic about the work as they got to understand it. And then you would go away and go to make the appointment like a week or two later, try to find some time to start the training. And then the person who's basically in charge of the gatekeeping of that person's schedule didn't really understand what the heck was going on. And so, what do you do again? Oh, you're doing media training, right?
Media training.
And it's like, oh no, here we are again.
Here we go again.
And that person, rightfully so, is tasked with, this person says yes to 10 things. They have to pick the two most important things they actually can put on the schedule for this person. So that became very frustrating. And that's what I was so thankful to work with the DCCC. But the only reason those people worked with me was because they were candidates. They had not been elected. And the head of the DCCC at the time said, look, you need to take this training. And they were as bought in as they could be at the beginning,
So what did you do with them specifically?
Well, in the beginning, in that group scenario, we kind of laid out. The way I understand things is contextually, like big picture. So I like to see like all the moving parts first, and then I can get into the nitty gritty. And whenever I work with people who don't like working that way, it's just it's challenging. It's challenging because they just want to get into it, and I don't really understand something until I see the whole. And so that's how I train as well. So kind of laying out the theories, why we're doing it, to start to build some buy-in. And then we did some group activities to get them in their body to see how they weren't breathing, right? Actually, how difficult it was to actually speak in breathing, speak openly with your voice on a released exhale, how to inhale while you're listening, how to be in this flow cycle without kind of going into what we call your back office, which is kind of pre-planning the next moment, not being present, and just trusting that the next thing that'll happen, you'll know how to deal with it. Words will come out of your mouth because you've rehearsed this thing, and all the stuff we deal with acting. And then we went to next day or a couple of days later, we broke them up into small groups of at least 2 people each. And that was really important because when you're training an individual, it's very hard to listen to the trainer in the sense that like a lot of defenses are going on, even well-meaningly, right? It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. But when you're watching the training happen, you can start to see so many different things that you can't really understand or see when you're actually in the midst of it, in a very conscious way of understanding, I mean. So, we get them into that environment, and then, we do a lot of before and after, or old way, new way, because again, getting out of this way that there is a correct way of speaking or being, that's not my business. It's not my job to determine those things. But my job is to start to skill build. And if we can kind of move out of this idea that this skill is helpful, this skill is not helpful, out of this kind of very binary approach, then a lot more of the person's imagination starts to open up. So old way, new way is more like, okay, that's the way you used to do it. How did you do it that way? Like what physically were you doing to produce that outcome? Okay, new way, what physically are you doing to produce that outcome? Because the aim obviously always is to get rid of the trainer. I want them to be their own trainers. And then we use diagnostics a lot. We use a lot of on-camera work so they can actually be in the position of the observer and the experiencer, because those are very different.
You did that with them as well?
Yeah. So we did a lot of actor versus human stuff, and just trying to see like, okay, when you're doing your stump speech, see, okay, there's that version of you. Now you're telling me a story about like your life. We asked them a few questions that are about them, and all of a sudden you see this other person show up. And then really discerning the difference, qualitatively, the difference between the two, and specifically what is happening physically, anatomically, experientially inside of them, breath-wise, that is actually causing these changes to happen, right? And then we start to work on getting those qualities more into their stump speech so they can be involved in the thing they're talking about, which again starts to do a lot of the things that your father-in-law was talking about, Ali, quite organically and naturally, because that person knows what they're talking about. They have a clear point of view on it, and they're just trying to express their clear point of view. They're not trying to convince you of anything. It's that extra little pressure that kind of flattens out the voice, which, ironically makes it more difficult for the person to understand you. And I mean on every level. Like, we'll have people in training do the same exact text one way and then to do the same exact text the other way. And the audience will report back that they literally heard these words for the first time. And they'll swear to you that, no, this is different text. They're speaking different texts, right? And it's the way you've been trained to listen. You listen, and so much of our training is about how people listen as well, and how people pay attention, right?
Did you fold in that sort of audience feedback in this group and this work? Because I know we do that with our, with our acting students. I did that with my acting students, and it was really revelatory.
Yeah.
Did you do that with politicians as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It was around this time. This was like 2000. This was for the midterms in 2018. And fortunately, 12 out of those 13 candidates were successful. They flipped their seats.
Ding.
What's that?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. That's
ding,
incredible.
Ding. Yeah. And, shout out to the Deep Triple C and all the work that they were doing at the time. I mean, Ben Ray Lujan at the time, he was very, one of these guys that was ahead of him, ahead of the times. And he was willing to take the chance on something that he understood on some level as impactful. And he was always, he's still alive today. I don't talk about him in the past tense, but he is very, just a very curious guy, like really inquisitive, like that kind of guy, that kind of, human that you love to just sit and chat with. And you'd forget in a second that he was a senator or, he had this position, so, those people feel like tribe members. Like these, they're just curious to get at what is it, as opposed to that's the agenda if they have one, to be a kind of fellow
and
researcher.
not just from a policy perspective, but from a
human perspective,
communication, yeah, recruiting kind of,
yeah.
And of those 13 like U.S. congressional candidates, how many of them, if you can recall, had like outgoing personalities that were like classic politicians, and how many of them were more understated, thoughtful listeners who you wouldn't necessarily think of as like, oh, this person would be a great politician?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I would be hard pressed to put him in those columns, because I'm thinking back. You had a lawyer who was kind of down to earth lawyer. You had a corporate executive. You had someone from the military. A couple people from the military training background. You had someone who he'd just become wealthy and he thought, hey, let me do this. What the heck? So you had all these different walks of life. I would say the two groups would be people who just weren't used to public speaking, and then the people who were, and the people who were more challenging because they had kind of calcified a way of speaking that wasn't necessarily, how do I say this? Wasn't necessarily taking in the other into account. It was more of the kind of stereotypical or traditional idea of leadership, like I am above you and what I have to say is important. So just by the fact that you're in my presence, you should be listening to me. Whether I pay your salary or I have a good education or, a lot of kind of statusy stuff that builds a calcification around being present and communication. And then the other group was just not, they just weren't used to being in front of people and sharing their thoughts and opinions. So
it's almost similar to like people who have had a lot of actor training. Sometimes having a harder time learning these new ways of being.
Yeah.
Well, and it to me, it recalls your father-in-law's story of like some people have learned things that are technique, quote unquote, that are very cookie cutter. They're very one size fits all. I have to go down at the end of my sentence if I'm to be understood or whatever. And it sidesteps all of that present information, authenticity stuff.
Yeah, politics are challenging. Especially when you get in these rooms where, thankfully I had this wonderful donor friend who still is a friend of mine today and very concerned citizen. And because of that, that's a funny story. I met this guy because I had written an article, really meant as a case study between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016 election. And it got picked up by an outlet, and they changed the title of it, and they changed it to "Trump will win because he has a better voice." And the case, I had not, full disclosure, I had not put that title on. It was just like, I mean, I was making the argument in the case study that Trump has a severe advantage here, and I kind of broke down the elements of why that is, just purely on a vocal level, and what Trump was doing versus what Clinton was doing. And they published that article on the morning of the election, and he did in fact win. So that kind of helped me a lot, right? Just synchronicity wise. And anyway, this donor found out about the article, read it, got in touch with me, blah blah blah, and so he starts to be able to get me into these meetings with all these kind of quote unquote high level people to talk about the approach. Which is very, he jokes about this, but I think it's probably accurate. It's very analog, right? In a digital world, this approach is very analog. And his argument, my friend's argument, is like, this is the piece that we're missing. It's like, at the end of the day, you knock on a door and it's just one human in front of another human. And if you don't know how to be human at that point, because the person opening the door, odds are they know how to be human. So if they open a door to this alien species in front of them, like, good luck, right? So, and that goes like door to door, but that could be like, the volunteers that are helping out, that are in charge of prepping the volunteers. Like, are they embodied? Are they, in their authenticity, et cetera, all the way down the line from federal to local. So it was interesting being in these rooms, and they were, democratic rooms, and then really talking about the awesome power of Trump and his persuasiveness, and they just did not want to hear it. It was very difficult because there was a sense of like, no, he's a used car salesman. Like, listen to what he's actually saying. And my argument was, no one's listening to what he's actually saying, but they're listening to how he's saying it, right? How he's saying it is resonating. And and he's had a lifetime of practice. It's not like he just learned how to do it. So why not like look at that as simply a case study and start to understand? But it's, it's challenging. I think politics are largely just kind of tribalism, a mindset tribalism, right? So if I'm looking forward to the future and I want to change things and evolve and think about ways I could do this better, et cetera, I tend to be, progressive or liberal or maybe Democrat. If if I love what I have, if I want to conserve it, maintain it, protect it, whatever it is, whatever the issue is, then I just, I tend to be called a Republican. And, we have this binary scenario here in the US, but if you go to if you go to European countries or other countries where they have, many different parties running a parliamentary system, et cetera, then it's really mindset. It's like I can have my prioritization of my mindset if it's green, or if it's about nationalism or whatever the case may be. I can find that little tribe. But here, we have a lot of different, sometimes competing intertribal, right? Issues that make it challenging to kind of live in this binary system. But by and large, when I'm in in those rooms, because they tend to be more liberal and more progressive, it's harder for them, I find, and this is forgive me, it's a vast generalization. It's harder for them to hold on to what is actually working, because it's not in their mindset. The mindset is, yeah, that worked that time, but maybe we could change it up a little bit and make it a little better. And the conservative mindset is, hell, that worked. Let's do that again. That really worked out, So that's what I found also kind of challenging as well, being in some of those rooms too. And I'm grossly oversimplifying here. So, but just from my little tiny perspective of the world and the limited experiences I had, that was really interesting. But getting back to those candidates, it was very interesting working with all of them, because they did come from and with all very specific and different authenticities, and trying to figure that stuff out was thrilling, and also kind of marking their level of buy-in right? So it's like the person who wasn't used to speaking out in front of people, they kind of pretty quickly bought in. But the corporate executive who was used to speaking out in front of people all the time and thinking people were listening to them,
right,
that was harder for that person to buy in.
I got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And it matters what I say. It doesn't matter how I say it. Come on, man. It's what I'm saying.
Right.
I got the issues here, right?
Right.
And that's,
and I feel like there's an element to all of this that, especially folks who are interested in gendered dynamics or like how particular individuals have been marginalized historically. Like when you talk about Hillary Clinton's voice versus Trump's voice, from my leftist perspective, I immediately think about sexism and oh, Hillary is so shrill, like, and Trump is able to just like say anything, but people still like him because he's a man. But Scott, the work that you do is sort of on the side of that. Would you talk a little bit about where you see those gender dynamics or marginalized community dynamics, how they filter into the voice?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I mean, I think everything is at play when you're talking about whether you're going to the supermarket and you're trying to pick which orange you're going to pick, or a political candidate. Like an individual is using all of their senses, all of their memory, right? All of their expectations, all of their fears, like it's all part of it, right? So to say, oh, this is this thing or that one thing, I don't know. It's, so I'm a big proponent of like stay in your lane as much as possible. And I tend to know when I'm getting out of my lane, the more enthusiastic I get. So that's always a bit of a barometer. When I'm really frothing at the mouth, I'm like, I'm probably pretty far outside my lane at this moment. And the frothing is trying to convince myself that I know what the hell I'm talking about. But I think staying in the lane of that conversation between Clinton and Trump at the time was really simply an attempt to not even talk about the qualities, the resonant qualities of their voice, but very specifically about point of view. And what I heard Hillary Clinton do, whether she was coached to do this, not coached to do this, I have no idea. But there were less distinct operative words for me to pay attention to as she was speaking. And what that means is simply, if I say to you, I want the red car, you pretty quickly understand that color is important to me. If I say, I want the red car, you quickly understand that it's important to me as opposed to you or somebody else, right? And so these are the vocal indicators we use for the listener to pay attention to this, and equally importantly, not that. Right. And so when I heard her talk, especially near the end, I heard much more of a flatness. Right. And it was just harder for me to start to discern what part of her point of view I was supposed to pay attention to, because I couldn't really detect that. And then, the paper goes a little bit into what happens when that happens. And, at the end of the day, we're an animal. And we jokingly, I say, we have the DNA of the ancestor that was walking through the jungle, saw something different and stopped, right? We don't have the genes of the person who kept walking because that person got eaten by the tiger. So, right. So,
or fell off the cliff.
Yeah. So when I'm not sure what's happening, I go into a bit of paralysis mode and I get super kind of alert, like something's wrong here. I don't understand this. Something's off. Right. And it puts me a bit on the defensive, which has nothing to do with the content, So we started to hear coming out of those rooms, like, yeah, I really like her. Like I really resonate with her, but I just don't feel like I know her that well. Right. And no amount of storytelling or biographical information it solves that problem, because that's not really what they're talking about. They're not talking about, I don't know enough facts about this person, but I
Right.
can't get a feel about this person, whether I trust them, right? And trust just simply meaning like I understand them, really is what I mean by trust, right? I understand whether to agree with them or disagree with them. And Trump had no problem with that. He love him, hate him, disagree with him, get infuriated by him, adore him. It was pretty easy to identify and resonate which one you would be when you listen to him talk. And I was just making the premise in the article that this is incredibly persuasive, this technique. Because if I leave the rally energized in some way, energized that I hate this guy, energized that I love this guy, that's what viral stuff is made of. And now I'm always talking about this guy. And, 8 years later, whatever it is, every single day, there's we'll do another podcast on flooding the zone and the effectiveness of that and why that's effective or not effective, et cetera. And when with Clinton, there was this kind of sense of, I'm not sure.
Well, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking so much about a woman who Scott and I are working with right now. She studies greenhouse gas emissions, and she's incredible, so smart, so vibrant, and we, in working with her, we recorded like an early version of her elevator pitch. And it was pretty flat and not really who she comes across as. But after, I guess, like 4 or 5 weeks of training, I recorded another version. And we started talking about pitch, she and I. And she watched the first clip over again, and we talked about the flatness of it. And I asked her about, why is she making some of these choices? And she talked about how, as a woman in science, especially a younger woman, she has been coached to that she can't vary her pitch too much because people won't take her seriously. And like, even now, as I'm talking about this, I'm noticing my own tension creeping in, like the fear of, not communicating in a way that people will actually be able to understand me. And so I listened to her talk about that, and she shared some examples that she had been given by various colleagues and articles that she'd read. And I said, okay, so now let's watch this other version. And we tracked the pitch, and she was like, oh, wow, my pitch is like going all over the place. And I said, okay, so what is, like, if you look at this speaker, what are your impressions of this person? And she was like, oh, she really knows what she's talking about. She's an expert. I can totally understand what she's saying. And it was a good example, I think, of we get some messaging, particularly those of us who aren't always paid attention to historically for various reasons. We get this messaging of what we need to do to be taken seriously, and that can really shut us down.
And then you get criticized for being flat. It's like, what?
And I think that's where like doing camera diagnostics work with MVM is so helpful, because it's hard to believe, especially if you're working with someone who doesn't have like the same background as you, or you don't perceive them as having the same challenges. Like, it can be hard to take them seriously when they say, oh my gosh, you're so much more compelling like that. But when you're able to compare these two versions of yourself with the differences of breathing and warm up, and employing the active breath, then you're actually able to buy in and see that it's not about, oh, I need to shut myself down and not like ask questions at the end of my lines, because then I'll sound like a dumb blonde.
Or smile or don't smile or all this other physical stuff as well. Yeah.
Scott,
I'm curious, Ali.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
No,
you for
no,
it.
please.
You go. Well, I was just going to ask you if you're like, how this work has impacted your activism,
Oh my gosh.
your phone banking, you do frontline stuff,
Yeah.
right? Do you do canvassing as well? I know you do phone banking. And how has this work affected you?
Yeah. I historically have been like someone with a lot of tension around and a lot of editing, self-editing for self-preservation, so that I can seem like with it, so that everybody knows that I am the smart one in the room and I've thought about everything I'm going to say and I'm not going to make any mistakes. And so going into phone banking, so this, 2024, I started consistently phone banking and consistently door knocking. And primarily I was going up to folks who were like swing voters in North Carolina. And when I first started, I would have my little script and I would come in and I wanted to make sure that I was like on top of it. So, hi, my name is Ali Evarts. I am calling from this campaign and blah, 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 blah. I need to ask you these questions. And the way that people responded to me were like, okay, this is a telemarketer.
Exactly. Yep.
I would get like, people would
I am
immediately
so good. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Yeah. Hang up on me. They would like, their tone was like, why are you bothering me? And I realized like I've been doing MVM for 10 years. Maybe I should actually like take it into account some of these things that I know how to do. And so I started coming at it from a place of like, I actually have no idea where this person is when they pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And maybe they're going to teach me something that I don't know. And I'm not working, like I'm not being paid by this campaign. And and even like when I'm doing door knocking and phone banking, I'm not usually advocating for a particular campaign. Like the purpose of it is to see where that person is. It's not to convince them. So when I started employing more of the...
I'm so intrigued by that.
Yeah. So, just to get into the weeds a little bit, basically in these early phone banking, like the organization has values. So they want to elect folks who are going to care about rural, middle, and working class individuals, that they are going to put in place policies that support the common person, basically is a lot of what the campaigns or like the organizations that I work with want. So a lot of the initial outreach is taking stock of like where people are. Because if somebody is already like has already decided that they know who they are voting for, and it's not necessarily the candidates who would support the values of this organization, then we want to take them off the list. If they're on the fence, then we want to filter them in with folks who have a lot of experience, talking and learning from folks who are on the fence. And if they're in the bucket of like, no, we definitely know, we always vote for the candidates who you all support, then we also don't want them on the list.
Right. Preaching to the choir.
Exactly. So we want to make sure that people are spending their time on people who haven't made up their mind or are less likely to even go out to vote. So I found that by coming into these conversations, like, hey, I'm just a volunteer. I'm interested in what you have to say too, because that is super valuable information for the organization to know. And it's also a really cool opportunity to get to know my neighbors. So when I came in with that openness, and sometimes I would get into the weeds and spend like 30 minutes with someone. And that is not necessarily like what the organization I'm working with wants all the time. But that is going to be more valuable for the person I'm talking to and for me growing as an individual, like in my own activism.
Yeah.
Get a true sense of, and not even get a true sense of what this person on the phone is experiencing, but like build my capacity for having conversations, open-ended conversations that I don't know where they're going to go. And so I found that a lot of, particularly like the phone banking that I was doing, a lot of those folks were just fed up with like feeling like their politicians were not representing them.
Yeah.
And I think that is like a huge issue writ large across the country, that folks are starting to pay attention to, and we're starting to get leaders who do listen. And so in my own activism, how do I contribute to like helping my neighbors have a voice to the people who represent them? And how do I help elect people who will actually represent the people? And because my personal drive is that transparency and that like democracy is functioning in the sense of like the people who are representing us are actually representing us, not representing special interests.
Right.
But that only happens if I'm like going around and door knocking, because like if average people aren't doing that work, then the only people who are doing that work are folks who are on the extremes, who feel really strongly that like it's their way or the highway.
Yeah. Democracy is a really big job.
Yeah, that,
it's a lot of work.
It's funny hearing that, Ali. I'm thinking about, I think I've always been, I would certainly as an adult, I would describe myself as a centrist, and I'm trying to reverse engineer that a little bit. Is like, where does that come from? And my family grew up on my mother's side of the family is from Puerto Rico, and my aunt was one of the biggest donors and raiser of funds for the Republican Party in Puerto Rico, but I've always been a little bit like on the left and back and forth, and the sense of being a centrist is like you, as a centrist, you need all the information. And I'm thinking about growing up and being kind of always a little confused, right? Getting information from my left part of the family, getting information from the right part of the family. And life is freaking complicated, and it's really paradoxical, and it's confusing, and it doesn't make sense half the time. And I don't make sense half the time, right? And so I think the growing up and becoming a centrist is really just a survival technique out of just trying to like, if I can just get all the information, I'll be a little safer. So I think a lot of the MVM kind of that sense of investigation, but also specifically the sense of transparency. And we say transparency meaning like appropriate transparency. I don't need to know everything about you, but to the task at hand and everything that's happening and what you're presently experiencing, it's super helpful. But I think that's born out of that kind of centrist mentality, like that you're kind of speaking to, Ali. I know you're maybe not consider yourself a centrist, but that sense of really being open to the entire experience and getting as much of the information as possible without the agenda of, I'm going to, call you over to my club. That's why I'm listening to you,
Well, and you, it's interesting to hear you call that centrist, because I think of that as like valuing diversity of opinion. So in the company, one of the things that Scott and I work to make possible, and I think one of the things I've learned a lot from you, Scott, is like we literally need everyone's perspective, everyone's unique perspective, to figure out what the best way forward is. And if we don't have everyone's unique perspective, then we're missing valuable information to be able to make decisions that are the best decisions.
Yeah. And
I say, best is like not really the word that I want to use, but like that's the one that I don't know what other word to use in that case.
And here's the irony, right? That when one is actually involved in that kind of scenario, even if my perspective isn't the one that wins out in the end, when the decision is made, I feel, well, I might not be happy about that, but I don't feel left out. I don't feel not seen. I don't feel not heard. I don't feel like crushed that I'm useless, right? That I'm never going to be heard or seen or whatever, right? So that's
disenfranchised.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction. Just because you create an environment where all perspectives are heard doesn't mean that every perspective has to be executed.
Yeah,
right? And I think this is in part sometimes the Democratic Party struggles with this. It's like we want to hear all the perspectives clearly, and then now what do we do? What's the next step? Because if we go in this direction, 3 of those perspectives are not going to be adhered to, right? And that's going to feel really bad. And we may lose their support. And now we're into another agenda once we go into that place, right? So I think for me, that's actual leadership. Like when you're making those decisions after you've heard all the information, and then you have your rationale that you can explain to everybody. That doesn't mean everybody agrees with it. And then that group is still engaged. It's not like, well, thanks very much, we're not following your way, but thanks for contributing, But no, we'll see you in 4 years. Thanks for contributing. Right? No, stay in the group. Let's keep next thing that comes up, or as we're trying to execute this, how can we tweak it? Right? So we all stay engaged and not not the other.
And through this active breath, like it necessitates change, which I think, if we're just thinking, okay, everybody brings their unique perspective and nobody changes their perspective, the way that I see centrist, quote unquote, or compromise in our current political system is like, oh, let's find the middle between like what is the average of everyone's perspective? But that's not what real discernment looks like. Real discernment, bringing everyone's unique perspective and everyone being open to being changed, means that the compromise might end up being way far on one end of the spectrum, because people have shifted and their perspective has changed by learning new perspectives.
Yeah, yeah. And equally, once you hear all the information, and I come in with a very specific perspective, once I hear all the information, I may actually determine that, no, let's not compromise. Compromise is actually the worst choice here.
Yeah, right.
Right? My perspective is actually not the best use of my perspective in this moment, in this situation. So you can just push that to the side. That perspective over there makes a lot more sense, right? To your point, right? So if I come in movable, but passionate about my perspective, but movable, again, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Then we're all driving towards, okay, what is the most effective, impactful, best, whatever the word you want to use for it, decision out of a real discernment, like Ali's talking about, that can happen for this moment in time.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a neighbor about this recently of, she came to me very passionate about people fishing at a nearby lake who were leaving trash, and she wanted to ban fishing.
Right.
And I talked through with her, about what it was, and what came up was a lot of what I was hearing her say was a lot of judgments about people who fish, like the type of person who fishes and how they don't care about the environment, and how and through that, because of my own experience working with the World Wildlife Fund, which I have for a decade now, which we can talk about in another podcast, maybe
next episode.
I was like, well, really, environmental change is complicated, particularly if you have people who are using a recreation space in wildly different ways. And there's lots of class dynamics, and there's lots of racial dynamics. And so outright, I am personally not comfortable signing a letter to ban fishing, because people who are fishing could be really helpful in cleaning up this trash, but it's going to take longer. And I think that's where all of this breath and voice work, it takes longer. And so it can be really tempting to say, oh, we just don't have time for that.
Yeah.
We got to fix it now. So how do we stay open and patient to the unknown of how these things are going to fall into place? When I'm phone banking and I'm talking to someone who's like, I never vote. Voting doesn't matter.
Right.
And I spend 30 minutes talking on the phone to this woman about what she cares about. I'm at the end of that conversation, I'm not necessarily going to convince her to vote. That's not the point. The point is to have a conversation and engage her, because she's not engaged otherwise. And that's, to me, I think that's a huge problem, because then we as a society are not benefiting from her perspective. And it means it's harder for us to find the most effective, useful next step towards, I don't know, a life that's better for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I just came back from Finland, like I spoke about earlier on, and we're teaching this workshop, and we had a certain amount of people, and a certain amount of people canceled at the last minute. So, the students showed up and the teacher showed up, and there were 7 of us, and we were trying to figure out. I said, okay, let's talk about what's going on here. We got a few students. This was supposed to be a bigger workshop. Let's talk about whether we want to continue the workshop or postpone it. And each one of us went around, and I said, okay, here are the kind of ground rules. You can speak about, your point of view, your opinion, but you have to try to do it without trying to convince somebody else. So just get your information out into the room so we can all hear it, and all hear the perspective, so we can all be, impacted by it. And then let's see what happens. So we did that for like an hour, and I said, look, really, what I like to do in most situations is wait for this thing I call the critical point of obviousness, where where you actually don't have to make a decision. That the information has accumulated in such a way that it's the direction is super obvious. But that takes, to your point, Ali, so I was thinking about this, to your point, that takes time, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly I'm not saying, every situation is perfect for, and sometimes you have to make quick decisions, or, as a parent especially, et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, right, group dynamics, we have a specific intention in mind. We have to make a group decision. One of the persons in the room said, well, I mean, it's your workshop, you're the leader. So like at the end of the day, I think you should make the decision. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. We're going to make this decision together, because we're all impacted by the decision. How could we not make the decision together? I said, I'm not saying that we're all going to agree. We don't have to keep going until we have 100% agreement on the decision.
Right. It's not a consensus model necessarily.
But we have to keep the floor open so we hear as much information. So we did that for a while, and I said, okay, does everybody feel? How do we feel? Do we feel like we have enough information? They're like, yeah. I said, okay, let's move to voting. I said, let's do anonymous voting, and it was like the excitement in their faces, because they had just gone through, right, an event that they were really participating in, without an agenda, without the anxiety of like, I'm going to try to convince you, and no, you're terrible. That's a ridiculous idea, all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot like our circle talk, right? Which is like you do your time, and when it comes to someone else to talk, they're not, they're, as much as possible, try not to piggyback on what someone else has said. Just kind of let it just be there in the ether, and then, talk about your thing, and we'll all try to do that with each other. And so we had the vote, and it was 4-3 to continue. And I was one of the people who voted to postpone. And and in fact, the two other teachers voted to postpone, but the students voted to continue. Wow. And I found myself like, I thought, oh, I'm going to be disappointed by this. But what I found myself was incredibly excited. I was like, wow, we really decided on something, and we're going to do this. So it was, but to your point, Ali, it takes a little time to actually have an experience that one can recall and call back upon and build off of. That's why breath is so important, and the kind of breath and the quality of breath you're existing in.
And I think the other thing that sometimes is a misunderstanding that I have in myself is like, rage is information. And like, if I'm being authentic to myself, and if I'm breathing in my full active breath, I mean, when I was going through the teacher certification, I was in a scenario where like someone really crossed a boundary for me. And I verbally just like all of the information about how upset I was came out of my mouth. And I was super, clear in the words that I was using, and super clear in my perspective. And the person who I was speaking to really, like, it upset him. Because there's a sense of, I mean, I could go into my personal view of like the sexism of when women are allowed to share their rage and when they're not allowed to share, and what particular men experience when they feel a woman's rage can be very scary if a man is brought up in a particular type of social environment. But that's all information. And part of what I'm training and what I value as a human is having all of the information. So it doesn't necessarily mean like I need to censor myself and my information so that I can be taken seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there are dangers of that sometimes. But it helps me to understand what communities I want to involve myself in and what communities I don't want to involve myself in. And on the flip side, being open to, I was just going to say, like,
No, good.
On the flip side, when I feel somebody's full information, if my value is having as much information as possible, then welcoming that information.
Right. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, or
even if it feels a little scary. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not about all agreeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? None of this is about all agreeing. Like, how could we? I mean, that's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, everybody's unique, really, enjoy that and celebrate that. And then let's all agree. Like, what are you talking about? That's not possible. But, we can find pockets of agreement. We can find scopes of agreement, right? We can find prioritizations of agreement. And I think on a large part, you could start to even describe what civilization is by looking at those, right, pockets of information and behavior around them. Yeah. It's the non-transparency part. It gets really tricky when you're not really sure where someone's coming from or what they mean, or how that feels different than what they actually said. Now, what do you do with that? But like, oh yeah, that's crystal clear. I don't want any part of that. Fine. Fine. Fine.
So how many rabbit holes have we gone down, Kyle?
It's a lot of rabbit holes. No, it's great. How are you feeling about your wonderful outline? I feel like we're rounding the corner into bringing this home, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you feel has been left untouched that you want to get into.
I don't really think that there's anything that I feel like we need to cover beyond what we've already said. How about you, Scott?
Great.
No, I'm good.
There is always the question of like, so why aren't you training politicians all the time, Scott? What's up with that?
It's true. Well, it's a
because he's so busy with actors.
Yeah, no, it's a challenging infrastructure. There are a lot of competing interests, and I really think the reason why I was able to do it at that time, the supporter was a bit of a visionary, took a chance. And who came in after that person, because they're like 2-year stints or 4 years, short-term stints. The person who came after that, who I don't actually remember the name of, they had no interest in of this training. Even with meeting with me, they were very progressive, and they were like, let's do it my way. Let's do it a new way. I need to put my stamp on it. So again, a bit of dilemma with like, oh, it's working. Why aren't we doing this again? Or even entertaining the possibility of doing it again. That's where like conservatives that, organizationally, they have a leg up. It's a little easier. And they've been doing it for a long time, right? Because it's a bit lockstep and, like we did it last time, it worked. Let's continue that. Let's turn that volume up. Right. Oh, that didn't work last time. Let's stop doing that, right? So, and there's some value to that, obviously not completely, in the sense of you want to keep investigating and probing and prodding. But I think, so there's that. And then the other piece, Ali, I think is it's really tough when you've won, when you're a winner, and you're a position of the winner, like you've been elected, it's tough to really acknowledge faults or weaknesses, and of course these aren't faults or weaknesses, but that's how they're kind of embraced, right? And you know, you don't want to expose that because you're the winner, and so that's immediately a place of vulnerability. So it's just systemically, it's hard to cross the finish line on these things, even though when you speak to these individuals, they really get it. And I don't think they're BSing me. I can see and feel it, like it makes sense, because, you know, stuff we're talking about on some primal level makes sense to many people. So, but then to get them into the position where they're actually training for a bit of time, where it has real, you know, changes and impacts for how they're being perceived and how they're perceiving themselves in communication exchange. That's a pretty tall order, you know. It's a tall order. I've just finished this the text transfusion book, the contents of it, and handed it over to Ali to help formatting it before we hand it into the publisher. But
hell yeah.
Something occurred. Yeah. So something occurs to me in that book. It's like, I think I read it in the preface or somewhere, that, you know, creativity usually exists in survival mode, not in abundance mode. It's just, I just find it harder to be creative when I'm in abundance mode, when I'm like there's no hunger, you know? And so a lot of people, when they're not feeling hungry, it's tough to think creatively, you know, outside the box. And that's just a real human dynamic that, you know, we can embrace or not embrace or just acknowledge. That doesn't mean, you know, it's never going to happen, but I think that's a piece of the energy that needs to go into the assessment of and the interaction with any individual, where you are in you know, is this the time? Is this the right time? And for us coaches or teachers or consultants, you know, for me that's a pivotal question, because if it is the quote unquote right time, and I have my own metrics in my conversations with clients on how to determine that, it's much like you were saying, Ali, with the phone banking. Like, if I go into an interaction with a client, really with the investigation to see if this is the right time, as opposed to hire me, it's my right time to earn some money, then that's a very different that's a very different conversation, right? And because what comes out of that, usually, if it is the right time for them, it's just a greater sense of buy-in, because it's about illuminating the fact that it is the right time and why it is the right time, if they feel it is the right time. So either those pieces of the investigation start to rise to the surface in a critical point of obviousness for both of us or all of us, or they don't. And if they don't, it's clearly not the right time. And that's, you know, and that's not fine or not fine. It's just what is. So, and it's to be acknowledged. And doesn't take away from the last hour we spent together trying to figure this out. Like, that's an experience that we've both had, and very valuable. So, you know, trying to keep to that integrity in all of these relationships and interactions takes some space. Again, keep coming back to that place and space, you know.
And I think if there's anyone who's listening to this podcast who, like, does their own phone banking or door knocking, or is interested in getting involved, I would recommend doing the MVM gym or the presence training with an eye towards how it might help that work be more sustainable. Because, I mean, yes, in addition to being like a more compelling speaker and a better listener, I've found it to be a lot less draining to do these sort of political activism activities when I'm employing my active breath. And when I'm coming in from a place of curiosity rather than a place of, like, this is what you need to do. You need to go vote, or you need to vote for this person.
Convincing. Yeah.
And that like curiosity is what MVM is so good at building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of that's trained from the acting base, which is like if you're going into every single performance, and judging whether you nailed it or not, or every moment judging did I have that or not. Oh my God, that's just it's not possible. Plus, it's incredibly exhausting to try to do that.
Not always that interesting to watch.
Well, most importantly, right?
Even
from yourself
not interesting to
yourself,
watch you
right?
measuring up to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, my friends, I would like to thank you both for the tremendous amount of transparency that you have exhibited today. It's been a pleasure to sort of sit in and participate on this conversation with you. Ali, is there anything you want to plug? Are there any things you want to throw out there, either MVM or otherwise?
There's just so many ways to get involved. If there are things that you care about, and use your voice and hone your voice with MVM. So, reach out to your neighbors, talk. I mean, the world can be a really scary place for a lot of us right now.
Yeah.
And I've found finding ways to connect with people who have similar values and want to do things rather than just sitting on social media. That has been like a huge lifesaver for myself.
Yeah. Fuel for hope.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. If you, listener, are interested in getting to know more about what MVM has to offer, Ali mentioned the presence training, which is really a really useful tool. It's a series of sort of pre-recorded workouts, and it's available on our website, millervoicemethod.com. You can also sign up for the MVM Gym, which I believe is starting next week or the week after. Should be a spring session starting up soon. If you have a question for us at the podcast that you would like to have discussed on air, please reach out to us, activebreath@millervoicemethod.com. And we have a couple of other offerings coming up for folks. Scott, you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in LA?
Yeah, there's an on-camera class that I do with a collaborator, and it looks like it'll be the first week in June. And I think what we'll do this time, we've never done this before, but I think we'll employ the text transfusion process, which is a new memorization technique that we've developed. And by the time, like I said before, by the time this is aired, I'll probably be done with my university tour. So hopefully the first of many. So if you're listening and you would like myself or one of us to come out to your class and teach some of the work, or explain some of the work, or whatever, just meet, hopefully there'll be more of these into the future as we try to get the word out in the world. Yeah.
And that person can reach out to either Active Breath or just info@millervoicemethod.com, I think, right?
Correct.
To get that sort of request in the queue.
That's right.
And then Scott and I will be teaching another workshop, a weekend workshop for actors in New York City as well, the weekend of the May 15th, 16th, and 17th. So a lot of the offerings that are available right now are specifically for actors, but the MVM Gym and the presence training, those are really just skill building and can be applicable to folks in all kinds of avenues. So if you are an activist, we may be able to support you in your way as well.
Yeah, and just to say that the presence training, you can get a 1-week trial for free. So if you're one of those people who is like, I would never be an actor, I don't like speaking in front of people, I want to get more involved, but I'm scared, the presence training is a great place to start. Our director for that, Tanya, who's incredible, she also hosts I think it's like 15 or 30 minute little one-on-one sessions that if you're a subscriber to the presence training, you can sign up with her and talk through like the specific thing that you want to work on. So, yeah.
And also,
Values.
I was thinking, if you're a non-actor and you want a workshop together or putting together a workshop or something like that, reach out to us as well. I just don't want to completely. I mean, we spent the entire whatever amount of time talking about politics and all this non-actor stuff. So if you're listening, happy to share the training with you on some level.
Yeah, we do coach one-on-one clients. So that is always fabulous.
Many ways to get involved. We love it. Well, I think that's pretty much it for today, folks. Thank you again for your candor and articulateness. It's always a pleasure. Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for making this a little bit longer of an episode. I'm excited for everyone to hear it. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And Scott, I will see you on the next one. Who knows who we'll have or what we'll be talking about, but hopefully it'll be thrilling and filled with vocal variants and release of information. What do you think?
You always know the right thing to say at the end. I'm kind of jealous.
Well, I'm glad you're jealous. I don't know if that was the right thing to say at the end. It's an honor to be envied by you, Scott. How's that? Is that better?
That's all that matters.
Great. All right, friends. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.